All right, so we are going to talk about content strategy and minimal viable donut. And if you thought it was minimal viable content strategy, same kind of thing. We just kind of amped up the title a little bit. And I'll let Carrie introduce herself.
So hi, I'm Carrie, peppy. And doesn't that last name work well at 3:45 in the afternoon when you've had a lot of coffee and a lot of soda? I work for Electric Citizen. It is a Drupal development company up in the Twin Cities. But I grew up in Iowa, so my heart's here. Oh yeah. Yep.
Just play the Iowa card.
I did.
My dad grew up in Iowa. We came down
but
all
I'm
the
real.
time.
Are you running
you're,
for office?
You're real cornbread.
Yeah, I got Hawkeye. I got Hawkeye gear.
Yeah.
I'm a project manager who also does content strategy and all the other things that project managers do when you're on a small team, which is like everything but what everybody else does, right? Yes. And Lynn.
And I'm your resident White Walker. I work at a company called August Ash, and we also build websites in Drupal in the Twin Cities. It's shocking. And we actually used to work together, but now we're competing, so we don't really like each other anymore. She didn't get that memo, but we're competing.
This is a really uncomfortable time to be finding that out.
It's okay. We'll talk about it later. So we're going to talk about donuts today, right? So we're going to start with a cake donut. Cake donuts were invented in the 1800s, and they're amazing, right? Carrie really likes the cake donut. I like something a little sweeter, and in fact, we brought some donuts to help portray that. So Carrie's going to pass around the box. Feel free. We probably have enough. We've got 12, so everyone can take one if they want, and hopefully they didn't eat too many snacks beforehand. But instead, I like things with sprinkles, or amped up with fruit and pancakes. Just pass them down. Pass them down napkins. Or frosting, or cupcakes, or cereal, or candy, or possibly even bacon, though we didn't get bacon today. Amazing. So you might, don't worry, we're just doing selfies, making the presentation so much better.
There's a presentation.
So why do we care about donuts? And why does this have anything to do with content strategy? Well, there's a metaphor here which may be weak or may be strong here, but we kind of look at it this way. Essentially, for years, Carrie and I have been working on content strategy for 2 to 3 years, depending on who we're talking about, but we've always been going towards that product vision, right? There's content strategists in the field, they're amazing, but it's not realistic. And what we've kind of realized is that we really want to set this minimum bar, and it doesn't have to be a bad connotation, because when we talk through the things we're going to talk about today, it turns out we don't do all of these things all the time on projects. We need to just get there. It's hard to have that product vision because clients aren't ready to do it. They don't have time. We don't have time. There's a bunch of things we need to worry about when implementing a website. And frankly, nobody has the money. Nobody has the money to spend $20,000 on a content strategist. It happens very rarely. So what we want to talk about all today is really how do we walk out of here with a minimum viable content strategy in your pocket. So as you look through this, think about how it relates with your projects and what you should be doing at very minimum to be really successful. So the first thing is really about hiring help. It's kind of ridiculous to think that we're all good at everything. So I'd like to talk about it in pieces that you can hire. And the reason why is really the average person works 47 hours a week. That's a lot. And then 4 out of 5 overachievers in the room are working 50 plus hours. So my team and me, I don't have time to do the work. Our clients don't have time to do the work. So we need to figure something out. We're also not all talented at writing content. So what I like to talk about is right in the start of the process, either in the sales process or when you get started, is who's going to do the work and have you thought about hiring people? I'm super happy to hear that people are actually putting money aside for images and video nowadays. It's actually happening on at least 80% of the projects I'm working on, which I'm surprised. But about that writer, how do you pay for a writer? And nobody has that money, right? So what's interesting is that you can pay a couple $1,000s to have someone write the first templates. So pay someone $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 to write 5 to 20 pages, and then use this as a cheat. So maybe you're going to have a blog, have them write one really good blog post, sets up the tone, the pacing, how it should be written, and then cheat from it, and then write the rest yourself. But I think it's really good, to have that in the budget to be able to get some really good content. Carrie, you want to talk about digital assets?
Right. So early on in the project, what we need to do is get our hands around what we're working on and what we actually are working with in terms of our client's content. And before you've kicked off the project, you've probably spent some time getting to know the site. At least your sales folks have, for sure. But we, individually, or folks who are working on the site need to understand what they're working with, and we want to lay the groundwork for our work with the client. Usually, that means a content audit. And my goodness, these great big huge spreadsheets, right? When we think of content audits, it's like this huge spreadsheet that's got more information in it and detail than anybody in the room can keep in their head. And really, there's only about one person who actually understands what's going on with the spreadsheet. What we want to do is take this overwhelming tool and bring it down to something that we can use. A slimmed down version, the MPV version of an audit. I think an audit you can boil an audit down to 6 pretty simple elements. Navigation position. Where does the piece of content sit within the site? Page title, the URL for that page or piece of content. We're Drupal folks here, so we know things are entities and nodes and blah, blah, blah. Boy, I just reduced Drupal there, didn't I? That was nice. Blah, blah, blah. Thanks, Angie. But we'll track the URLs, track the type of content, track some general notes, like what is this content supposed to be doing? What's its purpose? What is it supposed to be doing within the site? And then you might have an initial assessment of the content, like, oh boy, this page is missing some key calls to action. We want to really tighten this up. As I'm going through and looking at pages, I'm always kind of making these small judgments, and it's good to just get this stuff on paper.
Is that what general notes means? It means judgments.
Judgments, yeah.
And I think it's really important, actually. I literally go through and write purge or delete on a bunch of content, and I've never had a client come back to me and get mad about it. It's actually nice for someone outside to say, hey, it's not good enough. And they can take it or leave it.
Well, most clients love
they tend to
hearing
go
that.
with it.
Yeah.
So judge away.
Judge away. Yeah, there's our tweet for the afternoon. Be judgy. If you've got extra time and budgets, the additional elements to throw onto a content audit might include a good numbering system for pages. I've run into sites where page titles aren't the same as the H1s, and of course the H1s are what we're seeing in analytics, so keeping track of those discrepancies can save you some problems. There are other pieces of kind of like metadata about the page that you might want to also keep track of. Like, who's the author, and when was it last updated, and what are the keywords, what kind of file is it, how big is it, and who's the audience that's being served by this content. I think the bottom line, though, for an audit is that the structure for this document and for your analysis should be grounded in the project and the work that you need to do, or the problems, the issues you need to fix. And so you'll hear us talk about this theme throughout our presentation. Don't just dive in, step back and think about what you need to accomplish. Tailor your tool toward the project goal. So in a project that I've been working on recently, the client has some real issues with, I think, got a screwy menu system. And as a result, they've got key pages that aren't showing up in the main menus. So I'm tracking that because, my goodness, that's a problem that I want to solve. They've also got pages that we need to possibly get rid of. Do folks know what rot means? Redundant, outdated, trivial. So I'm tracking, I'm getting all judgy, and I'm noting where I think they've got redundant content. This whole structure is just one that I set up based on what I wanted to accomplish with the project. And that's the key takeaway for you. You don't have to dive in and do the big thing. Think about, rather, what you want to accomplish with the audit, and then focus your reporting and your tool on that.
I think it's also really important to think about how you do this with the clients. So maybe some of you here are clients, some of you from the agency side, but I think, as an agency, just going over here and doing it causes some problems, and the client doesn't understand what they have. And the client going away and just get your audit ready to go, then we'll meet you. They need some guidance on what should be found and cataloged, essentially. So I think we should think about, how can we put together the structure for the client, have clients fill in the body of it, and then have us kind of provide the feedback and analytics and the judginess, essentially, and then do it together. That way everybody knows what content is there, as well as giving them assignments. Recently working with someone that I talked to in August last year on a sales process, and then they disappeared for a long time, and then they came back and was like, all right, we're ready to go. I'm like, okay. And in the meantime, they've deleted 1,000 pieces of content. I was like, I told you that, but I didn't think it would happen. But they're like, yeah, I can do that. I know what's good enough or not, and it's great. So they went off and did their assignment, and now we're in a better spot for once we get started. So I think it's important for both sides of the party to think about how we can do this together. And also, while you're doing it, we wanted to just point out a couple tools. So one great tool is your friendly Drupal developer who can, pull out of a Drupal site all the nodes into a big spreadsheet or entities, and then also pull in like a CSV from your Google Analytics and kind of marry it together. Now, if you can't do that, or it's not a Drupal site and you can't pull the content out, one tool is the content analysis tool, where essentially you pay $25 to get up to 5,000 pages cataloged. So I did this in a demonstration for our website, for August Ash's website, and then in the spreadsheet, you can see that it's pulling all the content cataloged, and what's all over here, which you can't see because I want it to be readable, it's all the analytics based on all the different pages. So it really kind of pulled it out nicely for me. Then there's another a client we're going to launch in about a month here that is a really old website, as you can see, not looking very good, and basically it spit out a bunch of junk for me. So I wasted only $25. But it's not really going to work for something that doesn't have a more modern structure. So the August Ash is maybe 3 years old, so it worked pretty well for that. The tricky thing about using a tool like that is it's getting you kind of ahead, except for you're not processing what you're seeing on the page. So I personally like to go through and click every single thing, but if you have a really big site, you're not going to have the time to do it. So this tool might be good for that. Jumping into analyzing the content value. So now we have all the stuff on the spreadsheet. Maybe do it before kickoff meeting, maybe do it after, but at some point you're going to analyze, is this content any good? And there's a couple items that we like to think about judging when we judge through it. Is it going to meet the standards? So the first one, is it aligning with the goals? The goals we set out at the beginning of the project, are this content now supporting that? Not the old past, but how are we moving forward? Is anyone asking for the content? Do your users need it? Do you think they need it? Do you need it as the client to have that content up there? If nobody's asking for it, it certainly can go away. Is anyone going to keep it accurate and up to date? This is especially important for medical or scientific information. You need to make sure that things are accurate as well as up to date for SEO purposes. So if people aren't going to commit to updating it, get rid of it. Is it going to meet the brand and the visual appealing site that you want going forward? Is it going to hit that standard or not? Does it have an owner? Is somebody going to maintain that content? And if they're not, then it goes away. If you can't assign an owner to a piece of content, nobody cares enough about it. And then, is it device friendly? Is there things about the structure or a graph or something you're going to put on there that's not going to look really good on mobile devices? And then finally, is it visited? And Carrie's going to dive into that. The one thing I would say, though, is I try to tell clients right in the beginning, get rid of 50% of your content. Just do it. I don't really think that's going to happen, and it has, but I say big numbers so that we can at least get to the 25%, because there's a lot of extra stuff that's been building over the years that really can just be let go of. I hope somebody ate the Cookie Monster donut.
Yeah, really, where's that blue donut? So the analysis that Lynn just suggested, a lot of that really is, are people using it? Is it visually appealing? A lot of those pieces were, kind of qualitative judgments, and to balance that, and many times reinforce your positions, it's good to rely on a tool like Google Analytics to help you assess content on the site. Now, when I log into Google Analytics, I feel like Cookie Monster. because I just am like, oh, all this data, and I just want to spend my time just looking at everything. It's a little like the content audit, right? Where it says, "Mouse, how big of a spreadsheet can I build?" And I get goose pimples.
Is anyone else that excited about this analytics? No? Okay.
That's good though, we need you.
People like you.
So when it comes to Google Analytics, I have to remind myself to just like stop, to restrain myself and not plunge headfirst into the data. Instead, I need to stop and think about what it is that I actually need to do for the project, and structure my time and my analysis so that I'm pulling out the data that's going to help the client move forward, that's going to be helpful to my team as we are working on project goals, whether it's improving e-commerce or other types of conversions, whether we're trying to make sure that certain landing pages get more traffic. I want to make sure I'm thinking about what the client needs, and then also, looking ahead to launch. And pretty early in our project process, we talk about KPIs and what we want to be able to measure after we've launched or redesigned the site. So taking a look at that data early in the process is part of what I do. There are some real MVP kind of pieces to analytics. Analytics can be the most overwhelming thing ever, right? Because it's odd navigation sometimes. The way Google labels its data, I'm just like, that's what you're calling that. Okay. But there are some basic reports in there that can really be helpful. And I think I got, when I wrote basic page, I just had like Drupal on the brain. But you can look at your pages, right? See generally how pages are doing. See the top pages, tracking page views and time on the page and bounce rates. This report just helps you get a sense for generally which pages are most popular. Then dive a little deeper and look at the landing page report. Again, this is going to show you where people are coming into the site, and how much time they're spending on them, and if they're moving off into other places. It's giving you a good sense of how well those pages are performing. Then I like to look at something called the navigation summary. Again, it's a good report to use to analyze the landing pages that you just evaluated. It's going to help you see how people are coming to your landing pages and where they're going afterwards. So really good data to help you assess your content. Then the search report. Not every client has search tracking set up on their sites. If you don't, I really recommend it, because once you do, then you can use this report to see things like, what are the search terms that people are using on my site and where are they using them? So and you can go look at this report on a page-by-page basis and actually get a sense for, gosh, people are looking at my donation page, but they're searching things like capital campaign or other things that I think they should know already. So use that search report to gain some insights into potential gaps within your content. And then finally, there's a report for events. So that's when this is the report that will tell you how often people are watching videos or clicking on links or downloading PDFs and viewing other kinds of media on the site. This is really helpful for just seeing how how not necessarily pages are performing, but the additional media that you've uploaded to the site. You can see how well that's doing.
I think the thing that Carrie's talking about too, like none of this is brain surgery. This is pretty basic level Google Analytics stuff. I think the key is what are those things that you should be doing for a particular project, and then make sure you do it regularly. Because I think that's the biggest thing. That you're like, oh, we do that sometime, we do that something. Like make that set plan that you do regularly to make sure you have the best outcome. So the structure, right? So a lot of times it's time for clients to sit down and write a page, and that's great. And then they're staring at a blank piece of paper. Maybe they have some tools,
with some information like a creative brief or wireframes or something. But I think it's really important to have a tool or a document that really says fill in the blank. It is so daunting to sit down and start writing a bunch of content that if we can just make a document or use a tool that really says this space, this many words, right in here, it's important. It makes their life a lot easier. So as our jobs as contractors, our job is to set deadlines, make that structure, and then help guide them through the process as clients. And one of those tools is something called Gather Content.
Yeah, yep. Gather Content. And I Gather Content, my goodness, that company does the most amazing marketing of themselves ever. Has everybody and their dog pretty much heard about Gather Content?
So nobody has.
The best marketing ever.
Yes. No, it means this is tangible takeaway. That's awesome. So Gather Content is an online tool that you can use to actually track all of the content work that you need to do.
So wait, instead of a Google spreadsheet?
Instead of a spreadsheet, instead of a Google Doc, instead of a Word doc, you can set it up in Gather Content. You'll end up you can enter all the different sections and pages you need to create. You can assign, I'm going to talk about this template in just a moment, but you can also assign due dates and users who are supposed to do it, and actually see when they've been doing their work, and you can you can even set up kind of a publishing workflow. So let's say I assign Lynn is the author of page. She goes in, she does her work, she changes the status from draft to ready to review, and then it comes over to the next person who can then check in, review the page, add comments, upload files, suggest revisions, until you work your way through to a done, ready to go, final state. What's awesome about Gather Content is that it's feelable, sort of like our Drupal content types are. So if you've got your data model set up, you can come to Gather Content, create the different the templates for things like blogs, or your basic pages, or thinking of other examples, maybe if you're in a university or educational environment, you're going to have a content type for your programs. So set those up as different templates in Gather Content. Create different kinds of fields like text field, attachments. You can have checkboxes, radio boxes, and then you can take advantage of the API that Gather Content has and just hold up.
Wait, what was that?
How do you spell that?
GRRLW.
ZY.
You can import your pages from Gather Content into Drupal. It's great. The clients out there working on their pages, your team is building up the website, bring it on in. The other thing that's really nice is when you create a template in Gather Content, add a nice field for notes. And then content authors can be like, oh, when this gets over to Drupal, I want to make sure that I add the photo or insert the video. Just the stuff that you can't actually do over here.
And we add links into the mock-ups if there's a specific mock-up that they can go to that's posted online. And the other thing, now there isn't a Drupal 8 connection yet, though you can still work with the API to do it. But the interesting thing is why not just put it into Drupal, right? We've been talking about it for years, and it's never, frankly, developers are never that comfortable with us just putting content in right away in it because they're doing stuff, we work it around, and then sometimes clients get really creeped out because it doesn't look very good. So this is a great tool intermediate, and even if you don't have that many pages, you can still put it here and copy and paste it over. I have a client right now, we don't have that much, but what they do have is 10 people writing content. So this is great for them. This might not be needed though if you have one person writing a small amount of content by themselves, or even 2 people. But mass people with workflow and stuff, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's $69 a month or something. So
yeah,
it's affordable.
Yeah.
Super affordable.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to the next one in case you wanna go.
So then, we were joking about no more Google Docs. Well, okay, so you might need a Google Doc, and that's perfectly all right. The thing that we can offer clients is setting up the doc so that it's yielded already. So you've got your different sections that you know are going to be part of the content type. We're suggesting things like length. Here's what it should look like. Make sure you do this. Just throw in the instructions that people need.
So this is really for like a small site or someone working more by themselves. But I've been hearing over and over from people that I want a word count. Please guide me on a word count. I have no idea, and that's a great way to like stop them and then gather content. You can put that in the notes as well and kind of alert them when they're going over.
So bring it back to the MVP kind of approach here. The things we can do to help our clients and help our colleagues be more successful as they're creating content. Let's go through, make sure we got a good data model, identify your content types, provide people outlines and suggestions for the different fields or sections and how to structure that content. Suggest calls to action, and in fact, I like to make a point of leaving either setting up a field without a content or leaving a section on the Google Doc that's like, here are the buttons or the whatever tool we're using to insert calls to actions on page. I like to just make sure I call that out, call to action, but make people write those down so that they don't get lost. Highlight media needs. It's easy to kind of forget about the video or the carousel or the other files that all need to be uploaded to pages. Lynn is really good about suggesting, as she said, links, sentences, words. Just help people restrain themselves. Assign deadlines, and then start keeping track of any notes moving forward in terms of maintenance. Because as you're writing, it definitely comes to mind like, oh gosh, this page is going to need to be updated in a year. Start tracking that stuff early. Help people track that stuff early because it lays the groundwork then for a good governance plan down the road.
So you put that in as a deadline, or it's the maintenance notes.
You put like a field.
Yeah.
Either a field or we just remind people. But essentially, it's good to start thinking about it because you're in the midst of it. So like either whether it's by content type or by piece of content, how does this need to be refreshed over time? Because really, let's be honest, everyone gets to launch and then everything goes out the door. So if we can get a little bit written down, definitely the MVP, but we'll see. You'll see how far they get. So voice. So also while we're writing, we need to figure out how we're going to be writing, right? And Carrie and I don't write content, right? You write a little bit of content, but we're not writers by trade.
No.
Fair to say. But there is this sense that somebody needs to be thinking about the voice and the tone and the style of how you're writing. So really that comes down to a content style guide, right? What is your little playbook of how you're going to be writing all your content for your organization? A great one to cheat from is MailChimp. They have an amazing one. I think everyone feels very comfortable with what their brand is and what their voice is and all the communications that we have. And they have a great one online. You can just Google MailChimp Content Style Guide and find it. But it is really big, right? They have a lot of sections. They're a really big company. A lot of different people are writing. So it needs to be very thorough. I don't think that's what we need today. I think we really just need 1 to 2 pages. And my recommendation for a content style guide is kind of funny. It actually doesn't include things like punctuation and capitalization and grammar. It's important, but those kind of things work themselves out. I think it's more important to make sure that it's written down somewhere in this guide, what are the goals of the website, and for the audiences, who are we actually speaking to? Because when you're writing a piece of content, you should be thinking about who's going to be reading the content. You need to know what your voice and tone is, right? What's your online personality going to be going forward? This is your chance to reinvent yourself, essentially, digitally. And so we need to make sure that that is very clear to the users, but I think it's hardest for the people writing to understand that first. Visual standards. So this is one of those funny things, but I think it's important to sit and write, like literally as a team say, we're going to have a picture on every page, or this content type should have a slideshow. We need a video. It's part of that content planning process, and to write it down really will set that bar when someone's coming back and writing content long term. And then also how the content is going to change when it goes to the different channels, if it's in a newsletter and social media or different avenues that you're connecting with people. How does that change your tone? How does it change the writing? What gets posted where? So this might not make sense for everybody, but these are the kind of things that my specific clients are struggling with right now. But what I think would be really great is that, as agency folks, that we kind of assign it as a homework. If somebody's working with a writer, this is one of the things I ask them to sit down with their writer to figure out, because they're going to need to figure out the voice tone anyway before they start writing some samples. But it's also my job to give some examples of some things that they can look at. If you're at a university, that's a very different style guide than something with MailChimp. There's a ton of them. If you just start Googling great style guides, you'll find a bunch on there that maybe makes the most sense. So advice on writing. We're not writers, so we can't give advice on writing, but we can, right? We all kind of know some of the things, and actually if you start Googling, you'll find some keys about writing. But I think the first thing I really talk about is you can't have it all. So start in the sales meeting, if I'm in those, and I say, you will not get it all done. You will not write all your content. Be comfortable with that. And then at the kickoff meeting, we talk about it. And I make sure that not do I just talk to the project manager and the organization side, but I talk to make sure the boss hears this. Because there's this enormous pressure to hit some magical deadline with X amount of content. It's ridiculous. You just got to get the right stuff up there for launch and then not. So it's all about prioritizing because you got to let something go. But as to the writing, we have some thoughts of things to really focus on when you're writing.
And I think, Lynn makes a really good point. You can't do it all. So honing in on those landing pages, right? Those top level pages, making sure those are singing is one of the best kind of pieces of guidance that we can give folks. And just being really clear with folks that writing for the web is not the same as all the other writing that we do in our lives. My company does a lot of work with universities and government agencies where people think that using big words and long sentences is rewarded, and I'm like, nope, throw it all out the door. Instead, advising, help your team, help your clients remember that the most important stuff is always at the top of the page, that pages should have headers and subheaders peppered throughout. Because users are most likely to scan those headers and subheaders for a page and assess whether or not they want to invest the time in reading. So it's super important to get that structure in place for users. Use short sentences and short paragraphs. Bulleted lists are good, although my goodness, seems like...
Don't go bananas.
Oh my Lord, it's like 1920s in Chicago. You think it was...
I got it, bullets.
I got it. Not too many bullets, people. Let's go down the back and throw around some daisies instead of bullets. It's okay just to have 3 sentences. It's really okay to do that. You don't have to bullet them. Using plain language. And are folks familiar with what the term plain language means? Working in government, you're like, yeah. Plain language is simply about saying things in words that are easy to digest, very direct, and in an active voice. It's much more of a conversational tone versus a bureaucratic, well, in case of blah, 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 the user blah, 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 blah. Really, it's challenge your writers and colleagues to just say things simply and directly. And then, make sure you check your spelling and grammar, because it's kind of embarrassing when those things sneak past you on a website. So, and my favorite resource for writing is Letting Go of the Words by Ginny Reddish. Some people read the Lord of the Rings trilogy every year. I go to Letting Go of the Words because it's inspiring, and she's just amazing. Another really good resource for writing style is UK.gov. They have a writing style guide that's more articulate than I am at this particular moment.
It's okay. It's late in the afternoon.
It is late in the afternoon. Yeah. Okay. So what's your team working on? We've talked about making sure that the content is structured. We've talked about giving people a way to produce content and to know who's going to do what. And what they're going to write, but really the next piece is making sure that your team has a plan for moving forward. Clients love it when we give them
lists of things to do and who's going to do it and when. That's like just giving them the structure and giving them the deadlines is a great service. And it can be as simple as, here are the pages, who's just going to do it, here's where we need it. MVP, maybe a little bit extra sprinkly frosting goodness, could be adding in columns in a spreadsheet perhaps to track things like, don't forget you're going to need that featured image on the page. Who's going to be responsible for tracking down or possibly producing the video? Who's going to make sure that that you've got the call-outs and other media structures.
So you don't need to worry about that. That's an MVP.
What?
Like, you don't need to worry about that because that's not MVP.
You don't think so?
No.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
You're like an A student.
oh.
So, so just some tips and stuff that I've heard from clients is that first gather all your images together and put them in a folder. Like, what are all your good viable images before you start writing? Because when you're writing, you're like, oh, I'm not going to go find that, and which is why Carrie's making that note to go find these things later. You're not going to. So pull them into a folder and then be able to pull it out, especially if you're working in a group of people. You want to give them some guidance on what's good enough. Also work by section or type, so a type of client, type of content, like a blog or a section, because if you start picking the things that are easy, you're going to be stuck like miserable halfway through. Also, I like to get a couple samples of the content for each type of content before we start building. I want to change what we build based on the content. We can make our best guesses, but it's not going to be right. So we want to, like, this is chicken and egg the whole time of writing content and building. So I want to make sure I get a couple samples before we start anything. The other thing is you got to write anyway, so let's get the first deadline out of the way. Also, that prioritization before launch. Look at your spreadsheet or gather content, however you have that master list, and pick what's going to be done first, because whatever's done last is never going to happen. The other thing too, while you're writing, we worked on a project with the Science Museum in Minnesota, and they found as they were writing in the midst of it that they kind of got worn out and tired as they got deeper and deeper with the pages. They had about 1,500 pages, and they also realized that nobody was going to them. They looked at their stats and was like, oh crap, like no one's going that deep anyway. So they realized they took the things that they just thought was important and what they thought people needed to do when they come to the museum, and they took that stuff, moved it up a level, and then just got rid of the pages. So they ended up at like about 400 pages at the end of it. So they cut 2/3, which is great. And they pulled it up. If it's important, it's there, it's not. And at the end of the project, they've added 1 page in the last 8 months since they launched. So if they can do it with all the bureaucracy that goes on in a big museum, I think we can all kind of do that. But think about that as you're writing. If you're feeling kind of less energy as you're getting down there, maybe that's how your users feel too, and maybe it just shouldn't be there. Content testing. So we have a couple more topics. I hope everyone's still okay. There is more donuts left. But we're going to talk about some content testing. So Carrie's got a lot of energy. So Carrie and I both have done some content testing on projects together. And I think what's really interesting to me is that it's actually, we start doing testing, right? We're testing functionality, we're testing design and user experience. And then we realize by the end of the hour, and the next person, that we're actually finding the content's the problem. It's not the functionality that's the problem. It's always the content. They have their mouse somewhere, they can't read it, they can't find it. And it's amazing. So I think it's so important to do some sort of testing to be able to make sure that your content is good enough for people to find it. Because this world is full of scanners, and if they can't scan it quickly, they're going to miss your message. You want to talk about the 3 types?
Yeah. So three types of analysis you can do on content. First, readability. And that just comes down to, do these words work together and do they make sense? Can I scan a page? That's what readability comes back to. Thanks. All that work that we put into teaching people how to write for the web, that's going to make our content easier to read and easier to scan. And frankly, gosh, it's shocking when we look at the population of the United States, the level that 50% of the population, in Minnesota, 50% of the population reads at a 6th grade level or less, right? I mean, anytime you think you're about to impress somebody with your writing, nope, it's all about making sure somebody can read it. And frankly, it's not just about making sure your pages can be used by lower literacy people. Folks who can digest your content, who can understand everything, also really appreciate just being able to zip through things, right? I'm not going to a page so that I can prove that I can read Wordsworth, right? I want to get something done. So, testing for readability, tools like Readable.com will let you plug text or a page URL into it, and then you'll get back a score that tells you, super important, what's the grade level of this page. And I tell you, when I get something back that's tuned to a high school senior, I turn around and I'm like, okay, let's start making it simpler. I want to check and see how many clauses do I have in my sentences, and how long are my sentences? How am I using 50-cent words, or am I using my nickel words? This Readable.com is a great tool for testing just how good of a job you've done at keeping your content simple.
And I've heard that the goal really is about an 8th grade level. That's really where you should be targeting at. And then for folks, having to work or have the pleasure of working at university, people say, well, our students are much smarter, they're at a higher level. This is also for, SEO purposes. People want it simple, digested, you get better ranking on that as well. So it's not just about, a grade that people are looking at.
Mobile too.
Yep.
It's tough to read thick, dense content on mobile. Findability, that's another measure of content performance. And really the deal is, the questions here are, is my content findable through search? Like, have I written it in a way that if somebody looks for X topic, or, I think we know that people tend to search on this phrase or that phrase. Do I have those phrases in my page? Is it going to show up when people use our search tool? That's one type of test for findability. Second is just, how well does the site architecture work? How do our menu labels work? And TreeJack, have folks heard of TreeJack before? It's a great tool for testing your sitemap and your navigation levels, just kind of how you've labeled your different menu items. With TreeJack, you enter your sitemap, or whatever portion of your sitemap you want to test. You set that up in TreeJack, and then come up with like 3 tasks for people to do. If you were blank, where would you look for, or where would you click? And then the test actually shows people a page, or shows people the tree, and they records where they click in response to your question. So you will get a really good sense of whether or not your site structure works, and the labels that you've used within your site structure work as well. Lynn and I worked on a project together for a government agency. And one of the tests that we did in terms of content findability was asking users where they would look for regulations within the site and on the page. And we had thought that they were going to, when it came to looking at regulations for one species, we thought they would go to species. Turned out they didn't at all. And we found out really quickly that, we've got to address some of this and change our approach here. So it's a really good idea to check in and test findability as soon as you can, within the project. Then there's comprehension. And comprehension is like the kind of the deeper level. That's really about, okay, not only can you find it, do you know what I'm talking about, but it's, can you make a judgment or a decision based on what you've just read? And testing comprehension really is something that you kind of have to do in person, but you can take the guerrilla approach, right? And test with 3 to 5 people, and you'll learn pretty quickly where the big glaring holes are. So, for example, and the process of testing, for comprehension is really similar to what you've done in other instances. Pick the important page, or the page that's page or pages that are tied to key project goals. Think of the tasks that you want people to do based on a page, and then just sit and ask somebody to read the page, and then throw the task in front of them, and see if they can do it. So in this case, again, going back to the project that Lynn and I worked together on for quite a while, we wanted to make sure that users could answer questions like, how many deer can you take during the season? What methods, like how can you hunt? Where can you hunt? And so we just sat down with users and watched them use these pages to answer those questions. There are lots of great tools out there in usability labs for doing this kind of testing, but you don't need to go to that link.
And they say that you can do it with like 3 people now too. It really takes 3 people, and then you start getting repeated answers with the same problem. So it's very lo-fi. I mean, you can even do it at a conference. Grab people in the hallway and ask them a couple questions.
Right. So, kind of what's our MVP recommendation approach to content testing? Test early. So, you can test things like your site architecture and your menu labels. You can do that with TreeJack even before you've started building out in Drupal. Focus your testing on like the top 2 levels of the site and on those key pages. You don't have to dig super deep, and you don't have to test everything, but get to the most important performance parts of the site. Test your top 3 user tasks. Go back to your project goals, figure out what are the things that you're really going to be held accountable to when it comes to the success of the site, and test around that. Test with 3 to 5 people, and buy them coffee or other things that will make them super excited to be about your testing.
For user testing.
What?
$5 coffee for user testing, especially with this new Starbucks app, and just sit there and order it, and it's amazing. No one's used it, though I cut out coffee 2 months ago. I'm jonesing. I'm jonesing. All right, we have a couple more topics to get through. The next one is waiting to maintain. So governance is a big thing, right? And I was just saying a little bit before that nobody does anything after launch, right? We get to that, it's a big push, everyone's allocated time to do it, and then everybody wants you to get back to work. So, in governance, if you're not familiar with it, it's really the process of you're creating and maintaining the content after the site is launched. So I say, phooey, it's not happening anyway. I don't talk to anyone that this is really happening. So let's stop trying to do it right after launch, and let's let everything settle down for 3 months. And then I think it's our job as an agency to go meet with clients and then walk them through what they need to think about. And so that maybe that something gets happening. But if you do it right away, everyone's done. We just need a little bit of break. So the things that I like to talk about are the following. First of all, who's doing the content now, right? There might have been a big pool of people for this big push, but to maintain it long term, let's make sure we know who the roles are and how the content is going to flow. Like maybe there's not 5-step approval process anymore. Maybe there's just 1 approval. So how are we going to do it? And then what tools are we going to use? Then help folks understand the concept of an editorial calendar. When are things going to get published? When are they going to get written? And it really should be thought of on a quarterly process. I think week to week is great, but let's just start with here's our year goals, and here every quarter this content will support it. And as you get better and better at it, people can get a little bit deeper. And that's all about creating the new content. So what about the old content? So hopefully you took those great maintenance notes, but if we didn't, let's at minimum just say at the top level, each type of content, how often should we be maintaining it to make sure that it's good enough. And then I'd like to not walk out of that meeting without having someone assigned to looking at Google Analytics. It's not a super hard thing. We walk through some basic stuff. So I just want to make sure somebody raises their hand and says, I'm going to look at Google Analytics on a regular basis every month, and we'll report back some things so that we can change what we're doing to update the site. I do find that when people come to us to build a new site, they've already lost their energy on Google Analytics like 60 to 80% of the time. They're just not looking anymore. They don't know what they should be looking at. So guiding someone in that process is great. Then finally, the politics. So this is the biggest thing I hear all the time from people is that that's great and everything, but it's hard to do this internally. People wrote that content, or people want to have that content, but we don't need it. It's clearly terrible content, or it's too old, or this or that. But how do you tell your coworkers, too bad, not going to happen, especially in a big organization or a government or university or a place that doesn't really have good structure for doing it. Maybe they're really small and everybody gets to decide everything together. So there's some things to help with that problem. The first one is really creating a communication plan around the project while you're going through it. So the first thing I always say is that every 3 months, meet with the extended stakeholders. So there's usually a group of people that meet about the website all the time. And then there's this outlier group of people that either you care about or you don't care, but they care. This kind of weird in-between group. So if you meet with that group every 3 weeks, 1 month's a little long and sooner is too much, you'll have something to talk about because you'll do something on the web project, and that will give them a platform and a scheduled time to give their opinion. I don't see a lot of things that come up in those meetings that actually drastically change anything that we're doing on a web project, but people frankly just want to know what's going on and have a chance to have their opinion. They also have really good ideas, so that should be included in that. Now, if there is a couple people that are either more difficult to deal with or that they're a really big stakeholder in some aspect of the project, meeting with them one-on-one a couple times during the project to really go through a wireframe or just talk to them about their needs really makes those people feel a little special, and then I can also incorporate their feedback into the project. Because sometimes those people care, they just don't have time to be at all the web meetings as well. And then another way is to do stakeholder interviews. So before you start a project, you can either meet with individuals, and I've done it where you have 5 to 10 individuals, you meet with them for 45 minutes, go through a list of questions, so they have a chance to give a bunch of feedback before you start, which is great because that helps you build a better website. Or for a client, we just sent out a survey because they had 40 people in this kind of external stakeholder group. So we wrote up a list of questions. It took our team maybe a half hour to write up some stuff. The client added and sent it off and got this great list of feedback that has actually changed even the conversation we're having at the kickoff meeting. And that can be really easily done for a Survey Monkey. The other thing is really providing stats. It's really important. It needs to be up there. I want that in the top navigation. No one's going to be able to find it. Well, tree jack testing from Optimal Sort that Carrie talked about is that's a different button. It's a great way to do it. And she was talking about 3 questions, but I think you really need to max out at about 10 to 15 because people start to drop off. But you put together the questions, everyone approves them, right? So they can realize, yes, they'd be able to find my navigation by looking at this. You send it out to the external users, and you send it internally, and you see what comes back. You'll change some things on your navigation, but that at least hopefully quell the fact of man, it's in the footer now. No one's going to be able to find that. Turns out they all found it. We're probably okay. And the results you also get, not only is it right or wrong, it also tells you how fast you get there. So if you're well, I got there, but it took 2 minutes, then it's probably not good. So it also helps you make a better navigation for the users long term. Another one is a backup plan. I find this a lot with school districts. There's always this but when I do the prom event next year, I can't look at the old website. How am I going to know how to make the content? I'm don't worry about it. I'm going to put that old site of yours over here. You can always look at it. And it makes people feel so much better, especially people if they're technology averse and they're really worried because they need to look at something old. Just putting that on the server or a different server, then all right, they have it. We don't do this with every project, but if people start freaking out, it's a great little backup plan to give people a little more comfort. And finally, just make me the bad guy. I have no problem talking to folks and telling them why we made decisions and how that can kind of support it. Because sometimes the hardest is the internal conversation, and sometimes it's really easy for someone like us just to walk in and be no, actually what you should do is this. And they're oh, that's great. And then the project manager's I've been telling them that for 2 years. I'm sorry. It works that way. It's just not fair, but that's how it kind of rolls. So, use your contractor to be the bad guy. So that's it. We ran through a lot of different things about make sure you hire some help for some aspect of this, really about that content, inventory document and how important that is, analyzing the value of it at some point and helping clients realize that, making sure that when we do start writing content, there are really small pieces for people to write, and we give guidance on that. Make sure you know how you're going to write with that voice. And then thinking of some tips went through about writing, and then making sure you do some content testing. That Readable.com is stuff you can do super early. You can do usability testing later on when it actually gets in your site.
And then, wait to maintain. Let's stop pretending we're all going to do this and talk about it behind closed doors, and just actually set ourselves up for a little more success on that. And then tips on how to really manage the politics internally. So there's our contact information. Please feel free to reach out. We're friendly. And I don't know, we talk a lot. We only have like 3 minutes, so we'll stay longer if anyone has questions. Otherwise, we can talk tonight as well. So does anyone have any questions? We all questioned you up.
Is this a process that you integrate in every website, or this is like request is content analysis and everything else? To give a better example, none of the clients that come to us, they ask specifically for this type of services. But that is also the same, for example, in the development shop, they don't necessarily ask for testing, but we bake automatic tests into the process.
Exactly.
So I wonder, do you bake this into the process, or this is like an extra service that you can get?
This is for us, it's a baking into the process. So I think when I set up the process, I figure what's my non-negotiables, and then that's just going to has to include the price. So both of us don't do all of these things all the time, and we pick and choose depending on what the client's problems are. Like right now, I have a client with a huge content problem, so we're allocating more money in the budget to do that. But something a little more simple, I'll take some pieces to it. So I think kind of first figuring out what your minimal valuable product is, as well as like, what are you okay not doing? Because I think it is our responsibility at some point to do a certain level of things to make sure we're putting out good sites, mostly because the content really makes a big difference and not necessarily functionality anymore.
When I go and do training with clients, we're turning the site, we're opening the site to them, right? Getting them involved. We've imported content from Gather Content. Now they're going to go in and refine their pages. An example of kind of sneaking things in a little bit for me is, okay, I'm going to train you on how to actually go through the process of putting more content in place and images and such. I'm also going to talk to you about writing practices, and I see a lot of bullets over here. We're going to talk about these bullets.
Some of this stuff doesn't take more time as much as it just has to become part of like the vernacular or part of the things you want to bring up at a meeting a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you talk to clients about, the minimum viable content to launch? Like essentially the fact that you're providing them a website that they can add content themselves and continue to add content, or do you kind of push them to get everything in and then, how do you view that?
Well, early in the presentation, Lynn made a great point about how nobody's going to get everything done, right? So let's just have that face the mirror moment early and set expectations around that early on. People always either think they're going to get it all done, and then they're completely fatigued at the end. And we circle back to you've got your top pages. Let's stay focused on the top pages. That's what I try to help people do, is just really stay in those first couple of levels, and then after launch we're gonna clean up those third level pages and so on. So I kind of try to phase it and coach them through it.
I feel like to me I feel like it shouldn't be me deciding the priority for them as much as educating them about how fast you can go and where you need to be. So also when I was just in a kickoff meeting the other day, and people are like, oh, well, I don't know, do we need it? Then we don't need it. Done. I try to push on that, because if you're already then you don't. You can add it in. So I think it's the most of pushing and educating them about how you're not going to get there in an okay way, and then making sure that they set the priority. Because a lot of it is, if you haven't been through a redesign process, there's still people that haven't. You just can't get it until you go through it. And so as much as I can say, it's not going to sink in. So anything we can help them to minimize the pages and then help them make timelines. I think that's what our job is, but then I think our clients need to be thinking, what should I be doing? What is the most important messages for our organization? Does that answer the question? Anyone else?
On the government section, you mentioned that you put together executives also for keeping content updated. You guys have any particular tools you like to use for that, or just
I don't. It's just, it's literally like, it's kind of like running like a workshop meeting kind of. Okay, like here's it, let's fill it in, and then you can have your notes afterwards if who's assigning that. There are some really good, blog posts and things out there about the different kind of roles. Like, are you a subject matter expert? Are you the editor? Are you this and that? Those are the things that have to get set up early. But it's kind of funny because the websites I used to work on were like 6 figures and bigger, and now I'm like below that mark. So how I do work with it now is so much different because there's not all this layers of review process. So it just changes based on what the needs are. But I haven't really seen, besides like charts and diagrams, there are some charts out there that really outline the roles, but I kind of find like freehanded relates more to the clients and the projects the best. But there's also a couple of really good books too. Why am I blanking on Christina Halverson's book?
Oh, content strategy.
It's just called, no, it's for the web.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then there's also the content strategy toolkit. I feel like it's in my bag. That's a new one that came out. It's blue. If you just Google content books, you'd find it. Content strategy toolkit. This one. This is also a good one. This has a lot of like the templates and things that you can kind of peek through and find different things. So that one's by Megan Casey, and I think they're both Minnesota girls. Woo! We actually have one of the really big content strategy firms in Minneapolis, and if you're really into it and that's part of your role, they put on a really good conference called Confab every year. There's one in Minnesota, and there's this specific higher ed one, which I don't know if it moves around, if it's in a specific area.
It's Confab is like, you go and you're just like surrounded by these people who are just all into content, and they've got the big hipster glasses, and
it's great. It's great. And they have cupcakes because Betty Crocker's been a sponsor for
cupcakes
several years.
Yep.
They have cupcake breakout.
It's pretty funny.
Any other questions? No? Awesome. Well, thanks for putting us.
Yeah, woo! End of the day session. Nobody was nodding off.